Like I said in my earlier post, my research paper will be addressing um, energy sources in the United States and discussing the pros and cons of each energy source and which ones I think should be used and which I think should not be used. Um, basically, the pros for each one would be their outputs, and the cons would be the cost, the renewability of the source, and the environmental harm that each source does as we try to find a more permanent solution for energy. This first news article that I found is from 1980, and it was posted in the Globe and Mail um, in Toronto. And so basically, what this article talks about is even back in 1980, the North America, so uh, that includes the United States, Mexico, Canada, we're basically relying on non-renewable fossil fuels to supply the majority or 90% of the energy um, that we use in North America. And even back then, we knew it was a problem all the way in 1980. 35 years later, we're still relying heavily on these fossil fuels that will run out, um, but we still are trying to work up more permanent solutions for our energy sources. Yeah, that's the first big thing that this article points out is that um, more than 90% of the energy we consume comes from these sources. Now, this is back in 1980, but we still rely heavily on fossil fuels and these non-renewable resources. So even back here, they had the foresight to point out that if new energy supplies are not developed by the early part of the 21st century, the standard of living in the area of the world will collapse, and the world will reach the brink of disaster as the strong snatch what they need from the weak. So it's 2015, it now is the early part of the 21st century, and we're still relying heavily on these fossil fuels. It's not quite 90% anymore, but it's still up there, and that's definitely a problem. Um, One of the things this article points out is that um, the fossil fuels that we're using are damaging the environment, and they will run out. But even more so now, we know that um, it's damaging the environment a lot more than we had initially thought. Obviously, with issues of global warming coming into focus, that's bringing up a lot more issues than were even really imagined in 1980. Um, the this article suggests switching more to nuclear energy, and that's one of the energy sources I'll be discussing in my research paper. Now, nuclear energy, I talked about this a little bit in my last post, but there are some big upsides to nuclear energy because of the output just such a little input can create from nuclear energy. This article actually mentions that back in when this article was written in 1980, um, that basically to run a power plant for one day, it's going to take about 8 pounds of uranium. Now, this output produced by 8 pounds of uranium would be the same as 20 million pounds of coal. So 10,000 tons of coal or 8 pounds of uranium. Obviously, nuclear energy, even back in 1980, was seen as a much better route, at least by some scientists and this writer. Um, Now, obviously, like I touched on in my last video, there are some downsides to nuclear power. Um, one of those main things is that let's see if I can find it here. Somewhere in here it says that a large power reactor um, is so tranquilized that it releases in one day the amount of energy that was expended in a fraction of a second at Hiroshima. And that's kind of a scary thought, that these nuclear reactors are basically, through the course of a day, are basically the same strength as an atomic bomb, even back in 1980. I'm sure the technology has advanced since then, and I'll be researching more on that in the upcoming future. But also, like I touched on in my last video again, there were great concerns with the safety of nuclear power, because not only are you basically trying to harness the strength of an atomic bomb in order to power your generators, but also you have to think about the workers and the work environment where that site's going to take place, because this touches on that the workers are exposed to a great amount of radiation, and then also you have to figure out a way to safely dispose your nuclear waste. But basically, this article all the way back in 1980, to summarize it real quick, is saying that even in 1980 they saw that the majority of energy we were using would not be around forever. So they're suggesting that in the early 21st century we start switching to some of these newer energy sources, such as nuclear, geothermal, the renewable energy, solar energy, wind energy. Not mentioned in here is fracking, which is what was another big point I wanted to touch on. So I actually went and I found another article. This one's a little bit more recent, 1990, so it's still 25 years old. But basically, this was the earliest article I could find on fracking. And in this article, it discusses that the United States actually taught the practice of fracking to Soviet Union in order to increase its oil production and positively affect the Russian economy. So fracking has been around a while, but like I said before, fracking is the pumping of fluid and sand into a formation to increase the drain of oil, and nowadays it's also used to recover natural gas. So this again provides kind of another solution, but it's not as renewable as nuclear energy, and it's definitely detrimental to the environment. But yeah, like I said, back in 1990, 1980, they didn't have nearly as much of the information that we do on the negative effects of like such things as global warming and just the detrimental impacts that these energy sources have on the environment. So we definitely need to be aware of which energy sources we're deciding to use, and which energy sources are going to provide the most benefits with reducing the least amount of risk. So all in all, some good information in here. I'll post the sources to these in my blog post, and I will definitely be touching back on these in my research paper, hopefully. Maybe just as not as something of real content, but maybe just to point out the fact that all the way back in 1980 we were still having these issues. Because hopefully in my research paper I'll find some more recent news to use. And that wraps up this screencast.